of time, I can't show setup of everything because it will take too much time. And I've also shared, but I have shared resources in case you do want to set up the environments and stuff yourself. The resources are there. And also for the defenders and admins, there are also detection and mitigation resources. And right at the end, I've also put in some resources for anyone looking to get started with this stuff. There's some free and paid content for people looking to learn Azure. So for today, we're going to be focusing here on the attack kill chain or the attack lifecycle, discovery and recon, and initial access. Next up is, so this is our agenda. I've set up an attack scenario. First, I'm going to start off by looking at, the basics of Azure, what it is, but I'm going to kind of go through that quickly because that's not the main focus. Then I've set up an attack scenario, a live environment to play around with. I've recorded my demos because I don't trust the demo gods. So the demos will actually be videos, which also gives me the flexibility to be able to answer questions as the video is playing. Then the demos are going to start here. So discovery and recon. Then these are the 3 attacks we're going to cover in detail. Then, of course, I'd mentioned the resources that I'll share. Okay, so let's start off with what Azure is. I believe at this point, most of us, or at least have heard of Azure. It's Microsoft cloud computing platform. It offers all sorts of services, everything from virtual machines to storage and backup. I've spent a lot of time with Azure and I still can't name most of the services they have. They're pretty vast. And like most of the cloud platforms, AWS, GCP, they use a pay-as-you-go model. But the good thing is for most free accounts, for most beginner accounts, you can get resources for free, at least for a certain period of time. So this is just an image of just some of the services available in Azure. Like I said, it's quite a bit. You can spend a lot of time with Azure and not be able to know what most of them are. But you should play around with some of the more common ones, storages, VMs, that kind of thing. But if you do have any questions, you can dump them in the chat and I'll get to them when I have time. So what is Azure Active Directory? Because that's the thing we're going to be attacking quite a bit. Azure Active Directory is an IAM service, Identity and Access Management, and it's what provides the backbone for security in Azure, especially when it comes to role-based security, who can access what kind of services should be able to be accessed by users, how do we configure single sign-on. This is what plays a big part in security, both from a defense perspective and from an attacker perspective. For those of you, so when you hear people talk about Azure Active Directory and Azure, don't confuse them. They're not the same thing. Azure is the cloud platform, the whole thing that has all the services. Azure Active Directory is just a service within the platform. It's a service used to configure identity and access management. So for those of you who are familiar with Active Directory, the regular Active Directory, the one that's on premises, the one with the domain controllers and stuff, don't confuse that for Azure Active Directory. I know the naming is a bit confusing. You'd think it's the same thing, but they're really not. They're familiar only in the sense that they both provide identity and access management solutions or services, but they're not the same thing. So don't think AD, the one on-prem, the one with the domain controllers, is the same thing as Azure Active Directory. So because that used to confuse me quite a bit when I got started, because I was coming to Azure from a background of spending a lot of time in Microsoft Active Directory. All right, so more or less done with the intro. The one thing I want to focus on is when you create an Azure tenant, like when you sign up for an Azure account, you're given your own custom domain. So say, for example, I sell bananas and I want to create an account on Azure, maybe to host my website or just make use of their cloud services. You're going to get something like a custom domain that is unique to you. So it usually starts off with something like banana store, and the end part is always the same on Microsoft.com. So anytime you see a domain like this, you can know it's hosted, or at least it's using some Azure services. You can change it. So what most organizations will do is they'll get an Azure tenant, an Azure organizational account, and then Microsoft does allow you to change it. But for today's demo, I'm just going to leave it as a default. I'll show you what scenario I've set up. But just so you know, anytime you see a domain with this on Microsoft.com, you can just know it's using Azure or Azure Active Directory. Okay, so let's go to the scenario that I've set up for today's attack. So I've seen a question from Kelvin. Can we say Azure Active Directory is just AD with more features and flexibility? So no, Azure AD is not just AD. Azure AD is actually a completely different service. Like some of the things are familiar, like, you know, the way you have users and groups in Active Directory, you'll have the same thing, users and groups in Azure Active Directory, but it's not similar. I'll get to it, but it's not similar because what you can actually do is configure Active Directory to use Azure Active Directory, like a hybrid environment. I will explain a bit later on, but for now, in the interest of time, I'll get back to your question, but I'll get to that in a bit. So I'm seeing questions popping in. I'll answer them later. Let me just go on with the demos first and the presentation, and then I'll answer all the questions during downtime. So yeah, so basically I've set up a scenario for today. Which is live environment. So the target organization is going to be Vote International, and the attacking entity is going to be Butcher International. So all we know from the attacker's perspective is the name of the organization, which is Vote International, and we know that domain name from just Googling, you know, what is Vote International's website. So remember, I said the focus for today is just initial access. I want to be doing things like lateral movement or any post-exploitation activities. I'm only just going to be focusing on how to get a foothold and just a few things we can do after we get a foothold. So a diagram to just highlight what it looks like. So we're going to be coming from the perspective of Butcher International attacking Vote International. And this is the domain that they set up. Remember what I said? Anytime you see that on Microsoft.com, you can assume that that organization is using some Azure services or is hosted on Azure or using Office 365. Those are the most common ones you see. Office 365, Azure AD, such things. So yeah, let's get to the attacks. So we can't attack what we can't see. So every attack always begins with the discovery and recon. So domain enumeration. So remember what I said, in the real world, most organizations won't be sticking with this default domain. They'll have switched to something more, you know, user-friendly, like voteinternational.com. But since this is a demo, I just left it as default. But in the real world, you're probably going to be attacking a domain like this, and with this, you can't know, you can't know if it's using Office 365. You can't know if it's using Azure or Azure AD for anything. So the first thing we're going to need to do is figure out if it is. So for the sake of the demos, let's just pretend that we don't know that this on Microsoft.com means it's already on Azure. So I'm going to show a few tools for each thing. So this is the most common one. It's recommended by most people. AD internals, developed by Dr. Azure AD. So it's a full attack toolkit full of scripts to enumerate Azure, manage Azure, or Azure AD specifically. And if you want to find out if an organization is using Azure, all you have to do is import the module and then use this cmdlet. And when you put in the username, the best part about it is you don't need to know a real user. I could have put my name here, I could have put Gabriel, could have put, anyone's name really, Alice, Bob, whatever. And what you're looking for is this part. If you see managed, even if it was, voteinternational.com, like we're pretending it is, if you see managed, you can assume it's using some level of Microsoft services. And this is another cmdlet that will just tell you what some of the DNS records out there are. And again, if you see managed, you can just assume it's using some level of Microsoft services. Here are some of the commands. I just put them there for you to go through later on if you want to do the labs. This is another, for those of you who prefer using Python tools, I've also shared a Python tool here that you can use. It's called Python O365 Spray. It can also do a lot of things like spraying, password spraying, but in case, for our sake, all we're trying to do is figure out if our target domain is using Office 365 or using our Microsoft services. So all you have to do is launch the tool with the validate and domain parameters, then feed in the domain, and it will just tell you whether the domain is using Azure. Then for manual enumeration, but then you don't always need tools. This is actually, most of the time I won't even use those tools. I just use this little life hack, which is basically copy paste this entire URL. Then in the yellow parts that I've highlighted, just change the domain there. You can change it to say votinternational.com. You can even change it to microsoft.com to see if Microsoft actually are using their own infrastructure. And it will give you an XML file output. And then all you have to do is check this part, the namespace type. And if it says managed again, that's how you can confirm a domain is actually using Microsoft services. Sometimes it's this stuff like federated, but if you get federated or managed, you can assume they're using some sort of Microsoft services. All right, so that's enough about the infrastructure. Let's get to the good stuff, which is actually enumerating users. The demos are actually going to start from here now. The live demos are from here. So most attacks in these environments involve some level of social engineering and attacking users. So you're going to spend most of your time looking for user information, emails, that kind of stuff. And a lot of ways you can get that kind of information. So social media, primarily LinkedIn, email enumeration tools, or the organization's website. So I'm going to show you some of those. The most obvious one is LinkedIn, the site everyone loves to hit. I personally am not a big fan, but everyone has an account, every organization has an account. And this is the Google Doc I tend to start my recon with when looking for organizations. So it's just limit your searches to linkedin.com, put in the name of your organization. I can't use Vote International because it's not a real organization. So I just picked a real world organization, but we're not gonna do the recon. I just want to show how you do it. So when you go to the organizations page, all you have to do is click on the see the employees. And then, yeah, depending on people's settings, some will be private, some might not be. But from this, you can get maybe not necessarily a lot of emails, but a lot of names, like, say like John Smith or whatever, John Kamal, John Ogola, whatever. And then you can use a tool like Bridgekeeper, which can automate the process for you. And why I like it is it will output the names in email formats. I'll show you what email formats are in just the next slide, in a few slides. Then other tools I usually love to use. I'm not going to show them now because the point of this talk was more the attacks, but I've put the links for people who want to use them. Most of these tools, Harvester is free. It's actually just a terminal tool, a command line tool you can install on Linux. These two, Hunter, I believe, only gives you limited accounts for free before you have to start paying for the API. But I really love Hunter. It tends to give the best results. Dehash is also very cool because when it's not free, I should mention it's paid, but I think sometimes they have really good offers. So just look out for offers for those. What I like Dehash is, aside from just doing email recon, they also have a database of leaked passwords. So for example, if an organization was hit by a breach, Dehash collects such information. And if you search for an email, they'll also tell you if that email has been found in any password breaches. Oh, someone has recommended a tool, Breach Pass by Cybermentor. That's a pretty cool tool. Let me just search it a bit. One sec. Breach Pass. Tool. Oh, yeah, it's pretty nice. I actually never used that before. This is a tool that's been recommended in the chat right now. Oh, very nice. Thank you, Barrett Brown. I'll definitely check that out after the demo. So this is what I was meaning about email formats. This is a very important thing to know when you're targeting an organization. Different organizations use different email formats. So you can have first last, you can have F last, FM last, and this is what's important because sometimes you can be a situation where you have a lot of usernames, say from the example from LinkedIn, but you don't have you haven't converted them to emails. And you can't convert them to emails unless you know what the format is. So if one of the users we found is John Smith, we need to know what format it is, then convert it to the email format so we can have a phishing list. And of course, another source is the organization's website. Most of the time, you'd find a lot of emails on an organization's website, but I still check it out, especially for the About Us page. You can go to like the senior leadership team, management, and that's where you can find more emails, a lot of emails that you can use as additional targets. And remember, you'll only get their names from there most likely, but if you know the email format, you can convert those names into target emails. I've actually gotten successful phishes from viewing the senior management pages. Great. So let's pretend we've done all our recon and we have 21 emails in our organization. Remember, our target organization is Vote International. So here's one I'm going to start with the demos. So remember, every email you find might not be valid. You know, people leave organizations, but maybe the emails are still available online. So before you start phishing, you can't just start phishing, everything you find without validating if those emails are valid. And what we're going to do next is try to validate whether these emails that we've collected during our OSINT, during our recon, are legitimate, so we can actually have a valid target list to go through. Some tools do the validation for you, but most of the time these tools won't do validation. It's up to you to go through the extra steps to do it. So in our scenario, we've collected these 21 emails, but not all of them are valid. So let's see how we can validate them. Which brings us to our first demo. This is actually a very new tool. I think it was just released at the most recent DEF CON. Was it the DEF CON 29 or 30? I've forgotten what number it was. And it's from Flangvik, from TrustedSec. I used to use other tools, but once I started using this, I fell in love with it. Sorry, the link here is inaccurate. I'll change it in the slides. But just search for Teamfiltration. Anyway, you'll get the slides with the links. And yeah, it's a really awesome tool. So let's see how it works. So this is the first live demo. So this is what infiltration looks like when you download it. And it's a whole attack. It's a whole attack platform. It can do more than just validating. So I should mention what I've done here is I put all the 21 emails that we found in a text file. So we can use Teamfiltration to validate against the list. So we have all 21 there. So I'm going to launch Teamfiltration. Let me just explain the command parameters here. So it has a lot of modules. The first one the one we're using is the enumeration module. We're going to validate. Validate is confirm if these are actually live accounts, live emails. And it can validate, I think, against maybe 2 separate APIs, but it recommends using the Teams API because it's very fast. It can do multiple validations per second, per minute. And then all we're going to do is feed it the usernames, the 21 usernames we collected, and output the results into a database file. Every time you run Teamfiltration, you need to output to a database file, and you need to feed it a config file. Unfortunately, I can't show you the config file because to use Teamfiltration, you need to set up some API keys and accounts. So I can't show you that because those are my personal accounts that I'm using with the tool. So yeah, let's run the tool. You can see here it's running the enumeration. It's actually pretty quick. So remember, our target is 21. It's using a sacrificial Teams account I set up. And just like that, it's already started validating. So Stormfront, A-Train, Starlight, The Deep. It's found about, seven valid ones out of 21. So you can see, like I said, not all emails become valid. So remember what I said, Teamfiltration, every time you run it, you have to output files to a database. So I actually want to connect to the database right now. So this time, all you have to do is use the database parameter and the data. And remember, we outputted to this TF demo folder. So we're going to feed it that, and you still need to feed it a config file every single time. And this is why it just stores all the results of its attacks. So when you connect to the database, these are the available commands: show, export, exit. So what we want to do is show emails. And just like that, out of all the 21 emails, these are the only valid ones. I believe it's only found 7 valid emails. So this is the target list we're going to use. And it's even managed to go a bit further and get the object ID and the ID in the actual environment. So this is what we're going to use as a target list. So you need to do this before launching any attacks, because the last thing you want to be doing is targeting invalid accounts. So yeah, to get back to the slides. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in and I'll answer them whenever I can. So this is just screenshots of what you've just seen, so I'm not going to explain them. I should mention, again, for you heathens who prefer to attack from Linux environments, I've shared another Python script, which is called Omnispray from 0xDH. This is actually a very cool tool. I really do like it. If I don't have access to a Windows box, or maybe I'm doing it from a VPS, this is what I tend to use. And I'm not going to show a demo for this because we've already seen, but it does the same thing. So all you do is feed it you use the enumeration module, you feed it the file of 21 emails that I've shown. This time we're enumerating against Office 365, and we're just outputting this file. And if you can see, it got the same exact results as team filtration. Out of the 21 targets, only 7 are actually valid. All right, so let's move on. So we're done with the validation of emails. It's not a long step because all you're just doing is filtering. So now we have 7 attacks. So let's get to the actual attacks. We have 7 targets, sorry. So let's get to the actual attacks. We're going to start with one of the most basic, but honestly, still one of the most rewarding attacks out there, especially for cloud environments, password sparing. This is something I do on basically every job, whether it's internal, external, Active Directory, on-prem, or Office 365. Password sparing is, I can't explain just how many wins it's given me over the course of my career. And the thing with password sparing is the more emails you collect, the higher chances of success. So you really want to spend a lot of time doing OSINT and recon, because the amount of passwords you have, the amount of emails you collect will increase your chances. For those of you who might not know what password sparing is, it's kind of the opposite of brute forcing. So traditional brute forcing is where you target maybe a few users like Jane Doe and try to log into her account with thousands or hundreds of passwords. But this doesn't work these days as much, especially in cloud environments, because account lockouts these days come configured pretty well, especially even by default. So by the time you're trying to get to like your 5th or 6th attempt, you'll probably already be blocked. Now, as opposed to password sparing is they're kind of the opposite, where you have a few common passwords that are likely to be found on people's accounts, and then you spray the login page, but the password doesn't change. What changes is the username, and you're hoping at least out of your hundreds of users, or like in our case, 7 users, at least one user has a password we're using. So there's no magic bullet, there's no silver bullet for what password to try, but I always try at least this one, the company name plus year. This is something that I've seen quite a lot. So if our company was Disney, something like Disney 2022 or Disney 2022 with an exclamation mark, if the password policy uses special characters. I also see this one quite a bit, like the city or the country and the year. If you go online, most right emails also be recommending things like season plus year, spring or summer 2022. But that depends on where you live. If like you're here in Kenya, I don't think anyone's going to be using seasons in their password. But if you're in a country that does have seasons and a big thing there, that's something you definitely want to try. But the ones I do tend to stick to are these ones. Okay, so let's get to our next demo. So if you remember in our previous demo with team filtration, so remember I told you team filtration can do a lot of things, including password sparing. So that's what we're going to do next. So we've already enumerated. If you remember in our database, we have seven targets. And wait, which demo is this? One sec. Yeah, it's the right one. Yeah, so we have 7 targets. These 7, just want to show them again. So let's see if we can password spray them. So the password we're going to be using here is one of the ones I'd recommend. Remember, the name of the company is Vote. So I'm going to try password Vote 2022 and an exclamation mark. That's because it's a relatively common password that I see a lot. But of course, this is a test environment. So yeah, let me explain the command. So we're running team filtration again. This time we're using the spray module, and we're feeding it a file of common passwords, but our file only has 1 password in it, just that Vote 2022. Remember, we still need to output to a database file, and we still need to feed it a config. So with team filtration, just get used to leaving these ones and sticking to the same database per job, because that's why I like it. It saves everything in a single database, so you don't have to keep managing lots of text files. So let's spray these the 7 accounts in our database with the password there. So it wasn't going to take too long. If you had multiple passwords, it would do multiple rounds with sleeps between each round, but only have 1 password. So just like that, we sprayed our 7 targets, and we see that the deep actually has set a common password of what 2022. In the real world, you'll probably have a lot more. And we can see the deep actually has no MFA configured. Later on, I'll show you how we can actually bypass MFA in an Azure environment. But for now, we'll just leave the deep with the password is already set. So you can see, yeah, we actually got one. Let's check in the database. Actually, no, before we check in the database, the beautiful thing about Azure environments is it's just like Active Directory. If you have one valid login, you can enumerate basically the entire organization. So remember, we only had 7 targets at the beginning of this, but we're running team filtration again. This time with the exfil module, we're going to try and exfil all the information from Azure Active Directory again to this database with this config file. We found a valid login, so let's try and see if there actually are more users within the organization that we couldn't see from the outside. So it's going to tell us we only have one valid login, which we just found. So we're going to target that user, the deep. So that's ID 0. So it's going to take some time as it enumerates the whole organization. It's going to ask you for confirmation. So we're just going to approve it. So it's going to try and log in as the deep and try to enumerate all the users in Vote International from the inside. This time it's doing it from the inside, so no more OSINT externally. All right, it's just going to take a few more seconds. You can see it's exfiltrating users, and if you can see here, it's got 17 users from the organization, from the inside of the organization now. Seeing a question from, okay, just hold on. So now we're connecting to the database again, just to see what it's collected. So we're going to say show emails again. And this time you can see a lot more emails because now we've enumerated the organization internally. So we have the original 7 and we have the additional users that we've collected. And if you say show creds, this time we actually have, remember, it found a credential. So even if you lose the place where you typed it, the good thing is it's always stored in the database. So we can see there's a valid email for the deep and Vote 2022. But yeah, don't try and log in. This account's already disabled. I've already changed the password. But that's how you can use infiltration to manage this stuff. Yeah, so that's one attack. And I've seen a question from Byte Brown, again, whose actual name is what? Is Robert. Robert Isaiah, all right? So in real world red team operations, do they allow you to fish for the pass to use for password spraying? Do you mind clarifying what you mean by fish for the password to use for password spraying? I'm not sure if but anyway, in the real world, what determines what you're allowed to do is the scope of the job, what you're allowed to do. But if they allow social engineering, if they allow external access, then password spraying is almost always allowed in those scenarios or internally. So yeah, I've never done a job where they disallow password spraying. There are some jobs you're not allowed to say do things like phishing, depending on the scope, but password spraying tends to be pretty much always in scope because as long as you avoid trying to lock people out. Oh yeah, so Alim has actually shared another tool. He actually shared something very important I'm going to mention. So these are just the commands that we're using here. Now, here's something I should mention. Password spraying, don't think of it you do just one time. So remember, think of password spraying as a cycle. So if you remember, at the beginning, we only had seven users. And then when we password sprayed, we logged into the Azure in the background and exfiltrated a further, I believe 17 users. And so what you want to do usually, whenever you password spray, add those new users to your target list and then remove the old ones. So think of it as a cycle. Every time you find new users, password spray them again. But of course, you don't want to do it too frequently because if you password spray like 6 times in 1 hour, that's almost like brute forcing because you might get a lot of invalid logins. So that's why most tools have a sleep. So think of password spraying as a constant cycle. You do it over and over again as you get more users. So Alim has just mentioned something important in the chat. He's mentioned a tool called MSOL Spray, which supports Fireprox for proxying. What is Fireprox? Fireprox is a tool that allows you to password spray from multiple IPs across the globe. It uses Amazon's proxy service or one of those proxy endpoint services. I've forgotten what it's called, AWS's proxy services. And I didn't mention this one during the demos, but team filtration is also doing the same thing in the background. I'd already configured it, but you couldn't see it from the perspective I was using it. There are some modules that can't allow, like the exfiltration modules, but when I was doing the password spraying, when I was doing the validations and enumerations, it was actually using Fireprox. So that's one of the reasons I love it. Fireprox allows you to, because Azure has this thing called Smart Lockout. I've even put a link here, where if your password spraying from the same IP, say I'm attacking from my home, and they see that I'm trying to log into 20 accounts with the same password, they'll very quickly block your IP. But if you're using Fireprox, which is supported by team filtration, and it's also supported by MSL spray, like Alim has mentioned in the chat, it looks like your password spraying attempts are coming from multiple IPs across the globe using AWS, Amazon IPs. So that's why whenever I'm picking a password spraying tool, I always tend to pick one that supports Fireprox. And the two that support Fireprox here are these two, team filtration and MSL spray. Omnispray is a Python script, but it doesn't support Firefox, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why I tend to stick to these two. So that was a good recommendation from Alim. So I've shared some resources here. So for defenders, admins, this is how you can actually help detect and mitigate against password spraying. And for attackers who want to, maybe recreate the scenario, you can do that through here. Let's get to the second attack. Again, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat, or I'll answer them as I go along. So insecure blob storage, this is more an attack on the Azure resources as opposed to the users. Okay, so what is Azure blob storage? Azure blob storage it's a service, it's under Azure storage accounts. Think of it as, remember I said, most of these cloud platforms have a lot of services. So if you want to store files in the cloud, that's what a lot of users do and organizations do. They store files in the cloud. And Azure allows you to do that with storage accounts. And what we're going to be talking specifically is blob storage, which is basically file storage. You can store any types of files in blob storage, things like media, documents, videos, whatever. And it's available over the web, HTTP or HTTPS. And I'll mention, let me just go to this diagram to be easier to explain here. So when you create a storage account, you're given a unique identifier. So since our organization is Vault, say they want to store that data in a container in an account called Vault Data. So you create a storage account called Vault Data, Vault Backup, and this will be unique to this organization. No one else in the world, because they're publicly available. So no one else in the world should have this, because how else would I identify my storage account? So the first thing you need to do is create an account, and then within the account, you create containers. Containers, think of them as just folders to organize your files. Think of them as folders in the cloud. And now in a container, you create blobs, and the blobs are now just the files. Like say in this container for documents, that's where we put our Word documents, our Excel documents. In this container for images, that's where we put our images. In this container for logs, that's where we put our logs, and so on. Kelvin is asking, is the storage account or the containers, are they similar to the tenant ID? No, they're not similar. Tenant ID is a unique identifier for the tenant in Azure, but it's not the same exactly, because basically every object in Azure has an object ID that helps identify it. So even a user has an object ID, because you can have multiple users called John. But Azure, to know how to get them properly identified, you probably use the object ID. So the tenant ID is the unique identifier for a specific tenant. But in the sense that they're both unique, then yes, the storage account is unique to you, but containers can be, now from here, they don't have to be unique. You can have multiple containers because these parts aren't exposed globally most of the time, but I'll show you how they can be a problem. So just remember the account is unique. So here we've created storage accounts. This is a unique part. This is from the Azure backend. I've created some for the attack for the purpose of the demo. And I've created two storage accounts, Vault Backup and Vault Data. And within the account, we have containers. So remember, you create the account first and then the container, like the folders to store stuff. Now, this is where the misconfiguration or the vulnerability comes along. When you're creating a container, you can create it with certain types of permissions. And the default is private on no anonymous access from external entities. But what does happen is sometimes organizations need to share files with employees and stuff like that, or other places. So what sometimes will happen, you'll find some containers and some storage accounts have anonymous access, meaning people can actually read the files, and external people, if they can find the containers, if they can enumerate them, can actually find the files within that container. So Microsoft, even Azure actually warns you if you try and create a container with anonymous read access. But again, like I said, sometimes convenience beats security. Yeah? So usually you'll find, sometimes depending on the size of the organization, it's very easy to find containers misconfigured with anonymous access. So how do we actually find containers, find these anonymous access containers? We're going to be using this very cool attack framework for Azure called Microburst. By attack framework, I just mean it's a collection of scripts, a lot of PowerShell scripts that can do a lot of things. It's not just limited to finding containers. I've used it for a bunch of other things, finding credentials all over the place in Azure environments. But for now, I'm just going to show one of its functionalities, which is its ability to enumerate anonymous containers. So let's go to our next demo. So this is back in our attack box. So we're just going to import one script from Microburst, and to run the command, all we're going to do is use this commandlet, invoke enumerate Azure blobs, and then we're going to tell it enumerate any public blobs you can find with a name Vault. Remember, the Vault is the name of the organization we're targeting. So it's going to do its thing. It takes some time. Sometimes it errors out, but you should just let it finish. I think it's going to error out actually right now. You're going to see like some red and stuff. But just give it time, because all it's doing is it's basically like brute forcing DNS entries, just trying to see if like any of these things exist. So first it's going to look for the blob, for the storage accounts, and then it's going to try and see within that storage account, can we find any containers? And there we can see at least one container with the name Vault Backup has been found in our target organization. So we're going to copy that. So basically, this is a storage account. Remember, this is unique to us, Vault Backup to the target. And then this is just the regular, this is the URL. And then within the storage account, we can see there's a container called config. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to use a tool by Microsoft called Storage Explorer. This is actually a free tool. You can just get it from Microsoft. I've put the links and everything in the slides. And it allows you to just connect to the various storage services available on Azure. So when you want to connect, you go to the new connect dialog, and it gives you various ways to connect. So if you want to connect to the username and password, you use subscription. But remember, what we were enumerating was a blob container. So we're going to try and connect to a blob, and it's anonymous. Remember, we're trying to look for anonymous ones. So we're going to connect to that. Here's where you paste the URL. And remember, it's available over HTTP or HTTPS. So we need to put in the full protocol, HTTPS, then the name. Then it autofills the name of the container for us. So config. So that's connected to the file, to the blob, sorry. It takes a bit of time to connect because it's connecting over the web. And then just like that to bring up this attached containers menu. And here's the container we found. And now within the container, we can actually see the two files in there, web.config. For those of you who might not know, web config files are like configuration files for like IIS web servers. If you're a pen tester, red teamer, this is a very old school trick, but it still gives me wins to the day. A lot of people hard code credentials in these web config files. What we're doing right now is just opening the file to see if we can find anything. And if you see here, in this connection strings part, I've been on so many jobs where I'll find web config files, and in this connection strings, you can often find user accounts, database accounts with clear text credentials, depending on the organization and how well the environment is configured. So you should always check for these files. Every time you find the web config file, hunt for them, see if you can find anything. And in Vault, we can see in that backup file, in that anonymous blob, there's this IIS user, and their clear text credentials are actually in the file. So let's just try and log into Azure using IIS. And we know the domain is vault.int on Microsoft.com. You have to fill in the full domain name. Microsoft.com, and with the password we found in the config file. So easy peasy. That's just to prove we've gotten a valid account. Of course, in the real world, you might find different things. This is just what I've set up for this environment. In the real world, you might find confidential documents, you might find images, you might find something completely useless. You can find empty blob containers, but always check them out because you'll be surprised what people leave exposed when they think no one can access them. So if we see as IIS user, we've actually managed to log into Vote International. So yeah, I should mention something though. Okay, this is just the screenshots, just hold on. So I should mention something very important here. Okay, so config, Calvin's asking what if the config file is encrypted? Now that's up to you. Can you try and brute force the encryption? Like if you find a file there that you can use, the container is just a storage, it's a storage for you. If you find encrypted files in there, it's up to you to see if you can find some way to decrypt them, but there's no guarantee that what you find is actually going to be something you can use. For now, well, the main point of this was just seeing if we can find potentially exposed files. But yeah, good practice is encrypt all the backup files. So if you're an admin, you're a blue team out, encrypt everything. So I should mention, remember when I said the name of the storage account is unique to the organization? That vote backup was unique to this organization. Now here's the catch with this stuff. You need to be really careful during jobs because I'm like here I was safe because I know I'm the one who set up that vote backup container. But say you're targeting an organization like called ABC Bank, and then you find a container called ABC Bank Backup. There's no real way because say there's an ABC Bank here, there's an ABC Bank in Canada, there's an ABC Bank in Australia. You need to do your recon really well to confirm that that container you're attacking is actually belonging to the organization that you're doing the job for. Because remember, even I can right now create a container called Microsoft Backup if it's not taken. Yeah, I assume it's taken. So we want to be careful with containers, especially the anonymous access, because you could end up connecting to someone's blob that is not, because the tool won't tell you. All the tool does is brute force those entries or enumerate those entries with these files, with these permutations. That tool, I just use the script from Microburst. So it's up to you to do your homework and make sure you're not connecting to an external entity's container. But in this case, it was set up by me, so I knew I was safe. Again, these are just screenshots from the video that I just showed you. So all these tools are freely available. Most of the time, I should mention, when you're attacking Azure environments, you're probably going to be using a lot of PowerShell, a lot of Windows tools. So you probably want to set up a Windows environment for it. Now, to get to one of my favorite attacks, I'm going to spend a lot more time on this one. I really love this. It's a phishing attack, the illicit consent grant. One of the reasons I really love this attack is it bypasses MFA. It bypasses, you get access to the user's profile, their data, the files, the emails without needing the username, without needing their password. And even if they had configured MFA, you bypass all that stuff. So what illicit consent grant is it's a phishing attack that abuses the auth authorization flow. So for those of you who might not know what auth is, it's like, think of it as an authentication technology. Like when you install apps on your phone and they allow you to sign in with something like Google, instead of creating, 100 accounts for different apps, like your fitness app, your TikTok, you can just sign in with Google. You can sign in with Facebook, sign in with whatever account you already have. That's what OAuth does, yeah? So that's what we're going to be abusing here. We're basically going to send a malicious application to our target. We're going to tell them sign in with your Office 365 account, your Azure account. And once they do sign in, we're going to use that access to access their files. And so they don't need to put in their password. They don't need to do anything. They just need to have already been logged into the account, which most people are in the workday. So we're going to get access to a token and from the app, because we're the one who sends them the malicious app. The app is under our control. And through that malicious token, we're going to get access to the user's account, the emails, the files, and so on. So I drew this diagram just to help explain what I've said. I think this is actually the best way I should have explained it. So Remember, our target is going to be here in Vault International, and we're the attacker. So what we're going to do is in our Azure tenant, because I should mention it's something I didn't say is as an attacker, whenever you're attacking Azure environments, you're probably going to want to create your own Azure environment. It really does help, especially for attacks like this, where you need to use Azure services to attack Azure services. So even though Vault International have their own, you can set up your own as well. Good thing is if you sign up at the beginning, you get like 200 free credits. And even if you're paying, just make sure the trick with cloud things is when you use them and you're done using them, delete everything. Because you don't want to, I've been in scenarios where I've forgotten to delete stuff and end up being charged for things. You really don't end up in that situation. But in some, what I meant is if you're ever attacking Azure environments, you're probably going to want an Azure environment of your own. So these are the steps we're going to go through, a live demo of this. We're going to create an app. And this is where the main thing about this is what the app is going to request from the user. So think again back to example where installing things on your phone. Whenever you install apps on your phone, they require certain permissions. Can we use your camera? Can it use your microphone? Can it access your files and stuff? So that's basically what we're going to be doing with this app. We're going to create an app that can read the user's information, read the user's files, read the user's mails, and then all they have to do is gonna have to say, yes, I accept that the app is gonna do that. And just like that, we get access to the files. So I'll show this in a live diagram. Let me just jump to the demo because it's the longest one, but it's also the last one. So no stress. Okay, 1 second. I'm seeing someone asking, can I use this token in a browser? It's hard. Basically it's like an access token. You can't necessarily use it directly in a browser, but you can use it to request things you can use in a browser, if I'm not mistaken. Because what you get is the access token and the refresh token, which is more or less the most important thing you need when logging into Azure. We're not going to use it from that perspective, but ideally, yeah, you more or less can, but it takes some extra steps. It takes some extra steps because, but it's also all dependent on which API permissions you request. If you request enough permissions to do that, then you should be able to. But in this situation, we're just going to request enough to access the user's files. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce our target. Our target for this attack is going to be Edgar to Vault International. So this is the target's perspective. Don't worry, this is not the attacker. I just want to show that our target is actually using multi-factor authentication. I want to prove that. So we're going to log in with Edgar at Vault. So you can see here, I need to put in the code that comes from the app, the 2FA code. We're going to put that in and log into Azure, Edgar's account. So Edgar is a security conscious user, uses MFA, just like the rest of us should be doing. And just like that, we log into Office. All right, it's a bit, so there we are, we're in Edgar's Office account. And just for the sake of later demos, I'm gonna open Edgar's Outlook and his OneDrive, because those are the things I'm gonna be targeting. But for here, yeah, that's it. That's now what I'm gonna do is switch to the attacker perspective. So now we're in the attacker perspective. Forget all about, he doesn't know anything about Edgar apart from Edgar's email. So we're gonna go through this diagram again, and now I'm gonna actually walk through the steps one by one. So the first thing we're gonna need to do, so Edgar is our target in this case. And we're gonna be now in switching to the attacker's perspective and gonna go through these steps one by one. And the first step here, as we can see, is creating the app in our Azure tenant. So let's do the thing. So our attacker in this case is Billy Butcher. He's part of Butcher International. He's the one who's gonna be phishing Edgar. So when in Azure to create an app, you go to the app registrations menu. You can see I already have an app created down here, which is what we're gonna use, but let me just show you. When you wanna create a new app, you're just gonna come here, type in a name, like blah, blah. And the most important thing in this menu is make sure you pick either option 2 or option 3. The default setting is create an app that can only be used in this organization, in the Butcher International organization. But remember, we're phishing someone in an external organization. So you want to pick 2 or 3 because these allow you to, they're multi-tenant apps, meaning they can be used in by users in another organization. So you want to pick either 2 or 3. But since I've already created an app, I'm just going to leave this menu. I just wanted to show this part. It was important. Okay then, so yeah, so this is an app I've already created. I call it Office 365 Upgrade. You're even allowed to configure a logo, so you want to make the app look legitimate. I've already configured that. So I just downloaded an Office logo. And yeah, remember the most important thing I was telling you is the API permissions we're going to request from the user. These permissions that are going to let us access the account. So if you see, this is the menu where you configure API permissions. These are permissions our app is going to request from Edgar. So I put in quite a bunch. So they have the name here, they have the description, and they have so you want to stay away from the ones that require admin consent, because the ones that require admin consent, it means that when we're targeting Edgar in this organization, if the permissions we request require an admin's consent and Edgar isn't an admin, the Edgar would have to request permission from another user who is an admin. So you want to stay away from any permissions that have admin consent, yes. So we're just creating quite a number so we can maintain access to his account, profile, we can read and write his files, and all sorts of things. So now, yeah, basically our app is ready. Once you configure those things, it's done. The next thing we need to do is prepare the phishing link. And we're going to use this tool called Ponoth, which is a tool used to abuse auth phishing campaigns. It supports Office 365. Actually, I think at the moment it only supports Office 365. It's a pretty old tool, but it still works. I really like it. So I've already set it up here. So when you do set it up, you have to configure your app's details. So the first thing we're going to configure is the app's name, and I'll explain why you get some of these other URLs. So the first thing is very straightforward. The name is, yeah, so remember, I just should have mentioned what we're doing now is preparing the link to send it to the target. We can do it manually, but it's easier to use a tool to do it. So we're going to put in the name. That's the obvious part. The redirect URL is default from, you can get it from here. So basically, when you set up Ponoth, I've set it up on my domain. When you set it up, you just add this URL to the end of your domain. So my domain in this case is area66.net. So I just add that URL that I've just shown you. So that's what the redirect URL is. Client ID you can get from your app. Authorization URL and token URL are default to Microsoft. Like, they don't change. They're just endpoints, API endpoints used for authorization, generating tokens, that kind of stuff, submitting tokens, and they never change. They're more or less default. So you just can come to the endpoints place and copy paste them from here. So we're going to take both the authorization endpoint and the token endpoint and paste them in these two menus. Then client secret it's like a password or a credential for your app. I'm not going to show mine because, again, that's confidential information, but you can create them here in this certificates and secrets menu. You just create one, copy paste the value, then you'll come and submit it in over here. Then scopes are just the API permissions. You just remember these ones that we had configured the app with. You still need to put them in Ponoth. You put them comma separated this time. Just the name, comma, so on. Conclude redirect is the last one, which is basically once the user submits permissions, where do we redirect them to? I always redirect users to Office because I assume they're already logged into Office. So redirecting them to Office wouldn't be too suspicious. So you're going to click go, and it's going to output basically everything you've put it's going to output it in a JSON file. But the part we really want is this. Remember, we're generating a phishing link. So this is a phishing link you want down here. So this is what we're going to take to actually attack the user. This is a link we need to send in an email. So we're going to copy that, open our Outlook from the attacker side. I'd already prepared the email in the interest of time. So remember, our scenario is like it's an Office 365 upgrade. Our target is Edgar. I've sent him this link, and just like that, this is where that long link I've copied, I've hyperlinked the word here. So it's good to send. So let's just send it. Wait for the email to go. Should be gone by now, I believe. Alim is asking, can you redirect a user to another phishing link? Yeah, I guess you can, but I've never had to do that before. So yeah, this is so I should mention we're back in Edgar's perspective. We're Stan Edgar back in Vote International. And here's the phishing link. and Edgar's received. Remember, this is a social engineering campaign, so you want to really invest in making your email look legit. Of course, for me, this is just a demo, but you really want your user to click on your email and make it look as legitimate as possible. So he clicks on the email, and this is the menu that's presented. This is the consent part. Now, this attack is called the illicit consent grant, and this is where what's what the basically whole attack is about. Can you convince a user to click on accept at this page? So remember, these are the API permissions we set. So basically at this point, all the app is asking Edgar is, will you allow this app to access all these things? It looks legit. Unfortunately, this unverified part, unless you have a legitimate developer account that's been verified, by Microsoft and all that, most of the time you'll be saying unverified, but it's social engineering. Try and convince the user that they need to click on accept. It's a high pressure thing, whatever it is, whatever tactic you use. So you click on accept, and they should, if the task is successful, they should get redirected to office.com, like we see here. So at least we know from this perspective. Remember, from the attacker's perspective, we won't be seeing anything, but this is in the victim's perspective. Let's switch back to the attacker and see if anything's changed. All right, so let's go back to attacker perspective. And we see here, nothing has changed in Pornoth. So what you have to do is reload the page. It doesn't have like automatic alerting. So reload the page, select the API you're targeting, and just like that, it's auto-filled Edgar's name. And if you go to click, so if you had fished, say, 20 users, they load appear there one by one and successfully, of course, if it's successful. But at the moment, we've only fished one. So let's see if we can get his access token. So we're just going to try and request his access token. And this is basically what we've been targeting this whole time, the access and refresh tokens. I'll show you how we can actually abuse them. In the diagram, remember I said once they accept the attack, an access token is generated, and that's what we use to access their files. So we can see the access token is up there. And remember, this has all happened without needing to know Edgar's username, needing to go Edgar's password or his multi-factor token. That's why I love this attack. It bypasses all those things. So even if a user is using all those things, you don't need to know any of them. So now let's see if we can actually access Edgar's emails. So it has a search. Pornoth has a place where you can search for terms in emails. And if you just search credentials, that's something I'd like to search in people's emails. We can see an email is output here. So it's outputted in raw format. So it takes some reading. It doesn't have it's not a pretty tool by any, but it works. That's why I do like it. It works. We can see there's an email in the inbox called my personal credentials. And let's scroll to see the body of the email. The body of the email is here. And yeah, let's copy the whole thing. So it's an HTML document. If you're on most emails that are just rendered HTML. So I'm going to copy the whole HTML email, save it in a temporary file so we can render it properly and view it. Just going to call it temp so we can open the email and view it in a pretty way. Open the file, and this is the contents of the email. You can see Edgar saved his LastPass email, LastPass password, his bank account number, his bank account password. Now let's go to the victim's account just to confirm if an email like that exists. And you can see it's the exact same email that is over here that we've been able to access from the attacker's perspective. Now let's go to his OneDrive. Remember, we're targeting not just emails, but files. So this is Edgar's organizational OneDrive. He just has a bunch of pictures in here. In the real world, you probably have, documents, confidential stuff. But for here, we just have a bunch of wallpapers for demo's sake. Let's just open one of them to prove that he can actually. So it looks like Edgar's a fan of anime, pretty cool guy. So let's see if we can actually download some of these files from the attacker's perspective. So we're going to close that menu. We're now going to switch to another module, which is the drive menu, which helps you access people's files. I'm not going to put a search term. If you just don't put a search term, it will find every file. It will output every file it can get. So again, it's raw, it's not pretty, but you can just search within the page. So here we can see some of the names of the files we've just seen. Let me try and extract the one that we had searched for. I think it was called mist something. It was something like we searched for mist. It was this one. The mist wallpaper, whatever. So what you want to do if you want to download it is you want to copy this whole URL, the download URL, which includes some temporary access tokens that we've generated, the tool has generated for us. So you just copy that whole URL, put it in a browser tab, and just like that, we have the file from Edgar without needing. So remember, the cool thing this demo was done, the cool thing about this attack was we didn't need to know any information. We didn't need to ask Edgar to give us his password or anything. Edgar has MFA, but we were still able to bypass all of that and access his information. So that's one of the reasons I just really love that attack. Yeah, that was actually the last attack I wanted to show. I'll just put again the screenshots, the links to the tools. We've walked through all of this. I'm not going to go through it because we've seen all of it. This is just for your sake when you're going through the slides on your own, in case you want to see this stuff. And yeah, because I'm just closing up, again, resources for the attack. So there are other ways to access Azure. I just mentioned a few, but here are some other cool ones. There's abusing Azure App Services, which is like its web hosting. There's an Azure Device Code Phish. It's also a very cool type of phishing attack. There's a credential phishing, which is, there's the traditional asking a user for the username and password. These two blogs are actually by a friend of mine, Malusi. They're really great. They're what I use when I'm setting up phishing infrastructure. So there's still other ways. I just showed some of my favorites and some popular ones. To close up, I'm going to get to the question. I'm seeing more questions coming. But to close up, I know that some people here who might be beginners with Azure. And what I wanted to do is just share some resources that might help, or that even helped me when I was getting started in Azure security. This is one I recommend to basically everyone who listens. It's a free course and it comes with a certification. All you have to do is sign up with Google, and there's a lab setup that you can do and everything, and it gives you a certification at the end with has like flags and stuff. I can't recommend it enough. It's really cool. If you're not familiar with Azure, you might want to get started with the basics, with this 101 stuff. This is a Udemy course. It's not free, but the Udemy has offers almost all the time. Yeah. So I'd recommend that. I really like that course. There's a CRTP certification, also pretty cool. It's kind of like an advanced version of this one. So I've done that as well. Then I've not done these two, but I've heard good things about them. For YouTube videos, this is that free course I'd mentioned. It's also on YouTube, but just go sign up from the course part, because if you sign up from there, you actually get the certification. And these are just other talks that I really enjoy about Azure stuff. I'm seeing more recommendations in the chat. I'll just mention them in a bit. Alim has just said free AZ900 certification from Microsoft if you attend their free training day. Oh, cool. I didn't know that. So if you can get a free AZ900 certification if you attend training day. I don't know when that training day is or how often it happens, but maybe if Alim can share the resource, I'll be happy to talk about it. I've also seen more questions about attacks. I'll get to those. Books. Okay, Alim has shared the free training day thing in the chat, so you can check that out. These are the only books that I see that come highly recommended. There are not a lot out there, but these two are really good. I'm actually going through this first one, but I couldn't find any more. Those are the only ones I could tell. And cool. That is the end of my presentation. Let me get to the questions. I'm seeing someone is asking, how do you stop this kind of illicit consent grant from happening? Let me go back to the slides for illicit consent grant. That's a good question. So the primary way to prevent illicit consent grants is, you see this part where the user was asked to consent to the application, this part. You can actually revoke these permissions from users. If you're an admin in the Azure environment, Microsoft has revoked quite a number by default, but you find organizations still leave some of them or change some of them. If you, as an admin, you can actually configure Azure users to not have the permission to accept Azure permissions from third-party applications or from unverified applications. So that's the primary way to avoid this type of attack. Revoke the permission from users to accept third-party apps. Someone is asking me to go to the YouTube links. I'm going to share the slides. Like, I'm going to put them on my blog, on my Twitter. So don't stress about the stuff you've seen in the content. I'm going to share that. Another question is it possible to view user info for guest account? Company sent invite link to me and I accept it. Yeah, so there are ways to, okay, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but there are ways to abuse guest accounts, depending on what permissions the company has been set. has set for guests in the tenant. So that's completely dependent. If I think you're asking a question, I think you're asking, that's completely dependent on what guest permissions that you have within the tenant. But most of the time, guest accounts will be pretty limited, specific things. But again, it's all about abusing misconfig. So you need to still do your enumeration from that perspective and figure out if you can do anything else. That's a good question from Kelvin. Does having risky sign-in protection help against this? It doesn't, because technically this doesn't even look like a sign-in. Risky sign-in helps from, password sprays and that kind of stuff, maybe where you log in through the portal. But an illicit consent grant is just an app accepting, a user accepting an app's permission. So it doesn't really look like a login, because remember, we didn't log in at any point, we just used tokens. So from the perspective of Azure, we didn't actually log in to anything. I don't see any more questions. Just check the chats for, Alim has shared some pretty cool resources to the free Microsoft training. Thanks, Jane Doe, or free Microsoft certs. Oh yeah, thanks, Jane Doe. She's saying, regards to Pinto. Here he is, in case you want to see him again. Yeah, he's a cool guy, but really does mess up a lot, and he's never full. I don't know why I'm taking care of a cat. That's not my own. Actually, that's probably where I should start. But yeah, any more questions or anything? Any comments? I'm actually open to doing a lot more, Azure content. I'm completely open to it. I'm willing to do more. If you like this presentation, just ping me, let me know what else you'd like to know about Azure. I can do more stuff related to other parts of the attack lifecycle or anything else. And yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for using your time this evening. I will be sharing the slides between today and tomorrow. Just check my GitHub and my Twitter, my blog. Anyway, I'll share the links everywhere. As for the video demos, I think I can upload those on YouTube, because it's hard to share video demos unless you're putting them on some sort of streaming platform. But everything I've shown today was going to be available somewhere. Make sure you save the links Alim has shared in the chat for the free Microsoft trainings. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thanks for coming, everyone. I believe I finished pretty much just maybe only 10 minutes later than I intended. So thanks for using up your time this evening. Feel free to leave. Thanks, Kelvin. Thanks for Alim and Jane Doe. So I guess we hopefully will be seeing each other again soon. And have a great evening, everyone.
It was really for those of you who want to rewatch the session, it will be on our YouTube page, and you can find a recording of this session. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Gabriel on Twitter. You will find his Twitter handle on our post, the one that's promoting this session. And Gabriel, where can we find the slide?
So the slides, I'm going to be sharing them on both my GitHub and my blog. So just from my Twitter profile, if you go to my Twitter profile, my blog link is there, and that leads to my GitHub and all of my other places. So just check my blog. There's a section for presentations. I haven't shared them yet. I want to share them after the session. So yeah, feel free to check that out once the session is done. My blog. So yeah, just everything starts from Twitter. Go to my Twitter account, and from there, my blog and my GitHub.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
All right, you too.
To have you again.
All right, I'll definitely be back. Thanks for having me.